It's a Japanese idea, and 80% of the city's residents would be foreigners. A decision on the multifunction policy is expected in June, but as Jill Singer reports, some people are questioning whether it should be here at all.
Life in the 21st century. A brave new world run by nuclear power. Radioactive waste buried deep in our soil. Citizens tracked by remote control devices. Scientists in control of fertility. This is the dream some of our scientists hope could be made a reality by government. This is the story of the unleashed passion of our government and business for money and power, and of our scientists for the chance to rupture the barriers that usually restrain them. The dream began to emerge 3 years ago at the Japanese Ministry for International Trade and Industry. What about building an entire new futuristic city on Australian soil, suggested the Japanese minister to his Australian counterpart. Senator John Button liked the idea.
We're supporting a feasibility study into its potential. We think it's a very good and exciting idea. We've got to be looking to the future here in Australia.
Australia is an English-speaking country, a nice climate, and Australia is a multiracial country, so we can get used to the international way of thinking.
The Japanese christened the city the Multi Function Polis. The MFP would house elite professionals living and working in a 21st century hub of science, technology and leisure facilities.
まさに理想的な生活をエンジョイすることができます。
Nobody in Australia knew what Japan meant when talk began of fifth sphere living. But reminiscent of a flock of imperial concubines, our state governments immediately clamoured to be chosen by the great and wealthy one. The climate is right for an MFP in Melbourne.
The New South Wales government is committed to the success of the MFP project.
Take me, I'm yours, said the Western Australian, South Australian and Queensland governments.
These 5 proposed sites show that there is extensive available land capable of supporting the establishment of a multi-function polis.
Australia wants their money, but what do the Japanese want? After visiting Japanese officials working on the MFP, Professor Gavin McCormack thinks he knows.
The benefit, I think, to Japan is that this, for the long term, it would be a symbolic project which would consolidate Japanese economic domination through the Western Pacific region along a Tokyo-Sydney or Tokyo-Melbourne axis.
To kick off the feasibility studies, $1 million was chipped in by these Japanese business leaders. This was matched by the Japanese and Australian governments and Australian industry. $4 million in all, a figure which was to grow. A vast organisational structure developed in Australia, involving bureaucrats, academics and business heavyweights. They put a lot down on paper. The 7:30 report has obtained much of it. A joint Japan-Australia steering committee was set up in July 1988, headed by the chairman of the ANZ Bank, Will Bailey. The following November, a private company, MFP Australia Research, was formed to harness and develop industry proposals. The company reports to the Joint Steering Committee. At Bailey's behest, Clem Doherty, a principal of McKinsey & Company, was appointed chief executive. The federal government is keen to cement good relations with Japan. It's critical for our trading future. But the way negotiations are proceeding with a multi-function polis suggests a proposal could be causing more harm than good. Last December, ANZ's Will Bailey upset a Japanese delegation as they were preparing to fly to Australia.
Suddenly, a fax was received, cancelling the meeting on unilateral decision of Mr. Bailey. Blame must rest in the behaviour of Mr. Bailey, who could not even answer the phone to the Japanese side.
Clem Doherty also appears to have rubbed the Japanese up the wrong way. Doherty, who doesn't speak Japanese, reported Japanese embarrassment over Australia's delivery of a 350-page report in English shortly before a meeting. According to this Victorian government memo, a senior Japanese official passed his opinion The Doherty's negotiation style was both offensive and ill-informed. Paul James is a sociologist on a quest to keep himself and the public as informed as possible. He's been researching the work of 18 think tanks, set up by the private MFP company to generate industry proposals. The think tank members include eminent scientists, business leaders and government officials.
The implications are absolutely massive. They're talking about genetic implanting of devices in your body so you can be in constant contact with the outside world. It's going to be a democratic process, they say, because you can turn it off if you don't want to be in contact. But they also talk about this as being possible to monitor crowd control, to monitor the movement of people who have debilitating diseases like AIDS.
It was decided our future energy needs would best be met by developing a strong nuclear power industry. Australia should establish itself as a world centre for uranium management, digging it up, enriching it, installing nuclear power plants. Of the 11 construction companies supporting the feasibility studies from the Japanese side, 5 are involved in the nuclear industry. So, is Japan interested in offloading its nuclear waste onto Australia?
That's not entirely clear, but when you read the documents, you find that they talk about cradle-to-grave nuclear processing, which is quite an ironical term. But they certainly want us to do the processing of mineral sands. And mineral sands are low radiation minerals which come out of normal beach sands, get turned into the high tensile materials of the ceramics for engines, the linings for nuclear reactors, the use in missile technology. These mineral sands are seen as the key to the new materials of the future. They then break down and become a real problem for waste management, and the Japanese would like us to be involved in that.
The Aerospace and Defence think tank, apparently oblivious to the fact the MFP would involve a foreign power, looked at extending training and development in areas like war games at the Australian Defence Force Academy. Japan uses 30% of the world's pharmaceuticals. One think tank said it's vital the Multi Function Polis be established as the World Registration Centre and custom-free zone for pharmaceuticals. Current regulatory obstacles must be eroded.
I'm very concerned about the secrecy surrounding the proposed project. The promoters have been quite secretive and clandestine in organizing and making decisions about the project so far.
In November of 1988, the consultancy group Arthur Anderson Kinhill won a $1.8 million contract to conduct the major MFP feasibility study. Yet 7 months into their contract, we find in a document prepared by a public relations firm engaged by the Multi Function Polis company.
So far, our understanding is that nobody is clear what the Multi Function Polis is.
This is in June 1989, 2 years after Japan first floated the idea, and 2 years after our state governments clamoured to pick it up. Still, nobody knew what it meant.
The greatest risk to the project's image in Australia is ridicule and antagonism.
If its proponents don't know what the city of the future will be like, public fantasy can only run wild.
Meet George Jetson.
Public antagonism is expected over issues like who would own the multi-function polis.
What the ownership of the central package, the Manhattan, if you like. I mean, one of the recent consultants' reports said this is a project about building Manhattan in Australia. Who would own that Manhattan hasn't yet been settled.
The federal government is worried about what's become known as the Ruxton factor, hostility toward Japanese in Australia. On the 28th of July 1989, government representatives simply recommended deleting the words "the Japanese" from certain documents and replacing them with residents and workers. The latest commercial viability studies have been done by McKinsey & Company, a federal government contract worth $750,000. While most of the think tank ideas have been relegated to the back burner, but are still alive, McKinsey's has focused on the most lucrative. This report is part of the final package federal government will be reviewing in June, before deciding on whether to take the project any further.
We have a series of things which are proposed to be as potentially very profitable components of the MFP, one of which is a Disneyland. Another proposal is for a world betting system, a computerized betting system where you can put your card into your computer and you can bet on the races in Hong Kong or Tokyo or Seoul. Now, all of these things are somewhat bizarre, I think, and that these are now emerging as central functions of the MFP suggest that the whole thing is really becoming, well, quite bizarre.
The 730 report has confirmed the Japanese government has funded its side of the MFP feasibility study with money from a legal gambling organisation called the Bicycle Cultural Centre. We know that New South Wales was seriously concerned by this, seeing the organisation as a laundering mechanism for a range of right-wing organisations with links to the Japanese underworld.
New South Wales' concern appeared not to be shared by either the Commonwealth or other states.
All official concern seems to have dissipated at the thought of tapping into a market turning over $90 billion a year. How clean do you think the money going through Japan's legal gambling industry is?
Well, no one knows. It is widely known in Japan that murky figures with shady records are involved in the management of the gambling industry.
Is it wise for Australia to get involved with Japan's gambling industry?
Oh, I think there is a lot of danger in doing that. And in view of the murky record that the gambling industry has in Japan, I would suggest very strongly against any kind of move in that direction.
In Australia, the whole process cast doubt on the purpose of feasibility studies. Last November, the Department of Industry, Technology and Commerce drew up a timetable. March the 31st, 1990. The feasibility study report will be submitted to the Australian and Japanese governments. Reports that the MFP is feasible, recommends implementation.
Jill Singer reporting. And we wanted to interview Senator John Button about the plans, but he says it's not an election issue and he can't find time for campaigning. Other leading multifunction Polis supporters